They should have said the poet. The poet. They should have said the poet. The poet.
Sending poets.
This is Sending Poets, a podcast about ideas with the goal of understanding metaphorical truths within the beauty we find in the human experience. My name is John. With me is Bob. Good morning, Bob.
Hey, good morning, John.
And Tucker. Good morning, Tucker.
Good morning, guys.
And we're continuing our conversation on the 2023 Holberg Debate. Does consciousness extend beyond brains? So if you checked it last episode, we started this. I'll just do a quick recap. This is a yearly debate that happens in Norway. This particular one, there's 3 speakers. They're all taking the role of the heretic. If you remember, the moderator was explaining traditionally in debates, there's a defender of the faith, there's the heretic, there's the social democrat. In this case, like, they're all heretics. They're all kind of coming up, advocating ideas that are kind of maybe outside of the established truths, in quotes, with consciousness. So that's exciting.
The norm. They're not
Yeah.
the norm.
Yeah. So just real quick, so first speaker is Anil Seth. He's a professor at the University of Sussex. His take is that consciousness is mostly limited inside the brain. Second speaker is Tanya Luhrmann. She's an anthropology professor, psychology and anthropology at Stanford. And she has all kinds of things to say about like religious experiences and kind of talking to people about what consciousness is and their experiences. And then the third speaker, Rupert Sheldrake, his take is kind of that maybe consciousness exists outside the brain. Panpsychism, that comes up a lot. Three unique points of view is really, really great. And we wanted to dig right into Anil Seth's kind of first point that he makes about general anesthesia. So the 3 of us have all experienced this because of surgeries or whatever. And I kind of thought this was an interesting tie-in, perhaps. I just had the spark of the idea. So as I say it out loud, perhaps this will fall apart and we'll just laugh. But it occurred to me, this tie-in with Contact, that, Ellie goes through the machine and she's gone for 18 hours, right? She's gone for 18 hours. But everybody else, it's just instantaneous, right? Almost like everyone else was in some kind of general anesthesia, while Ellie was the only one actually experiencing real time happening. Everyone else somehow, just in the blip of a fraction of a second, was maybe put under for 18 hours
Here's why
and
I
then
like
came
that.
back, right?
Here's why I like
when
that
she came
so
back.
much. Yeah, imagine being Ellie. Like how uniquely disconcerting that proposition would be, to be that person who went through 18 hours of existence
While everyone else was just gone.
Yeah, imagine how
And
strange
came back.
that would be. It would just be unnerving. It would just literally be like the whole world was anesthetized and you got to walk around and experience existence for a day and a half.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty gnarly. Not necessarily the part of the, that doesn't come up in the debate. Obviously, they're not talking about Contact, but it seemed appropriate to make the connection. So,
I think Contact has to come up in every podcast. I think
Right.
that's this
Yeah.
unbroken link. Yeah.
There'll be a drinking game whenever we mention Contact or Carl Sagan, do a shot. But anyway, but yeah, let's go back into this idea about general. Do one of you guys want to maybe share a little bit more about your experience, one way or the other?
Well,
I could go first.
for me, it's just like, if you compare anesthesia to like an intoxicant, okay, if you're smoking pot or if you're drinking, there's this gradual buildup of this drug in your system, right? Where you can kind of like, it's a curve, it's like,
Yeah.
I have a beer and it has this effect. Anesthesia is just like, hi, I'm here.
Yeah.
Like there's
Boom.
there's no build up, there's no learning curve. It's just like that drug hits your brain and it just turns you off. And
Yeah.
there's nothing I've ever experienced that is comparable to that. It's just, it turns your humanity off like a light switch. You're just
Yeah.
not there. And
I
there's
know.
no dream state. There's no brain activity that you're aware of. It just turns you off, and it's
Yeah.
insane. And I know, like, it was pretty recently that they have even understood how anesthesia works. And I don't know how well they understand it. I just remember reading an article that like they've made some progress on that topic. But for a long time they just used this drug and they knew it worked, but they didn't know how.
That's really like gnarly to think. How did they find out that it worked if they don't really know how it works? Like, what did they, what were the original experiments? Were they trying to find something to turn consciousness off, or was it like an accident? Didn't look into this. I'm sure it's out there. We can find out, but it is kind of gnarly to think about. How was that discovered? You know?
Well, and I'm not going to name names, but John and I have a friend who woke up during a colonoscopy. Like,
Oh, right.
that's not supposed to happen. Like,
Yeah. Right.
they know this drug, they know dosages, they know how it's supposed to work, even if they don't know why it works.
Yeah.
But sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And there's been people who have woken up during like pretty invasive, like open chest surgeries, and it's like, that's not supposed to happen. Nobody should experience that.
Sometimes people steal anesthetics and narcotics and replace them with ineffective substances. And I mean, I'm not saying it's always the case. Sometimes you are
Yeah, I could see that.
idiosyncratically immune to, this very tested and tried and true, concoction. But I would think more likely someone's stealing the good stuff and using it personally.
Wow, that's kind of gnarly to think about.
I do recall, by the way, this happened recently where people were dying because what was replaced, it was like, I can't remember, fentanyl or propofol or something like that. What was being replaced was like tap water. Like they didn't even use saline. They used tap water, and people were dying of the infections.
Oof.
Yeah, not just were you having a bad day because post-op your surgery sucked, because you had no meds on board, even though they're telling you should be fine. But also you got a bunch of junk from the water pipes in your bloodstream now, and good luck.
Yeesh, that sounds nightmare. Like, is
You got to
this
be a certain kind of dark.
when did this happen? Is this like
Recently,
recent or like a long time ago? Recently, fuck.
Recently. Yeah, you got to be a certain kind
terrifying.
of monster. You got to be a certain kind of monster to think your high is worth that for somebody else to pay. That is so atrocious.
Yeah. Yeah, in another episode we'll dig into like moral ethics and stuff like that. But like, wow, that is kind of.
Let's stay on the anesthetic part. I want to do something really, really important, I think, which is a tie-in with Roger Penrose. So Roger Penrose he's a physicist, mathematician, all around good guy, Sir Roger Penrose.
Sure. Yeah.
Nobel laureate, partner with Stephen Hawking for many years on black holes, all kinds of good stuff. But here's the deal. He has thoughts about consciousness that tie in with anesthetics. Meaning he got to this place that we're all talking about, which is what happens when you turn it on, let alone, getting to the hard problem of consciousness, what happens when you're turning this thing off? Because I think it's exactly right what Tucker said, is it gets turned off. So
Yeah.
what's happening when this thing gets turned off? And so Roger Penrose partnered with a physician, anesthesiologist. I can't remember the gentleman's name. And they went deep into trying to figure out, what is this thing? What is this one thing that is happening? Because you're not like going to sleep.
Yeah.
Sleep is technically a form of consciousness. Really highly recommend the podcast on sleep from The Science of Everything, James Fodor.
Oh, yeah.
He does this amazing podcast in general. I highly recommend Science of Everything, but in specifics, this one episode on sleep and how there's all these very well-known processes that take place for the transition between what we call wake and sleep, but it's all a form of consciousness, meaning you are technically conscious when you're asleep. It's just a different version of consciousness, but it's a different thing altogether to be unconscious.
Like, turned off. The way Neil Seth, he says something in his opening statement like, 5 years ago, I ceased to exist, and then he's like, it was general anesthesia. I remember he goes like, by the way, highly recommended if you haven't done it yet. And then he said it's a really interesting non-experience, the whole thing. Exactly. There's like nothing there. You're just off, and then the next moment you're back on.
Go back. Well, if you look at you as like a machine, like essentially anesthesia turns off you, but somehow doesn't turn the machine off. Like it basically erases your brain, but leaves enough that your heart still beats, your lungs still function. It's crazy that like you exist in your brain, but there's a way to just turn you off without turning your body off.
Yeah.
Like, to me, it would make more sense if they gave you anesthesia and then had to, hook you up to something that still pumped your blood and breathed for you because it turned your brain off. But it doesn't. It just turns you off.
That's a great point. What about the point of the last debater making a metaphor of the brain being a radio?
It was the moderator. It was the moderator who said that.
It was the moderator. Okay.
Yeah, he said if I have my little radio here and I'm picking up radio transmissions, but something in the radio itself is removed, a component is or turned off, it's not like the radio transmissions cease. It's just I'm not picking it up anymore.
Exactly. And that combined with the fields concept of, this action field state, that does make an interesting proposition. And by the way, this is what I in a roundabout way, Penrose and his partner have come up with a thing in that they're saying that the consciousness is at a quantum level, meaning the thing that is being blocked is these microtubules. It's like these extremely tiny little structures in your brain.
Like in the neurons, right? I mean, like smaller than the neurons, right?
It's
or is it separate from?
I think
it sounds familiar.
It's so small, John. I think it's literally it's almost like the way I can think of it. Do you guys know how geckos are sticky? Like their feet are sticky?
Oh yeah, I think I saw the Veritasium on that. It's
like hairs split onto hairs to such a micro level that they're not sticky in like a goopy sense, but just the static electricity kind of sticky of like all these really fine like hairs just touching other things are essentially.
Yeah, there's like an angle or something at the edge. It's not like it is totally flat.
Well, it's totally flat. You can undo it, but not all at once. You have to peel it off. You have to peel at the edge first because it's so sticky that you can't disconnect them all at once. But if you break the angle just a little bit, you can make it far enough apart that they lose their stickiness. Anyway, the point is the brain has these structures. So I think it's subneuron. I think it's very, very tiny structure that Penrose, being a physicist, thinks is operating on the quantum level, or there is the potential that it's interacting at a quantum level of probabilistic outcomes. So consciousness is derived from essentially the unpredictability of a quantum state in such a way that he doesn't think it's computational. It's not a function of the number of computations you can do. You can't make a big computer that runs, 5x the number of computations a human brain can and make it become conscious. So they're distinguishing something specific here between, the hardware of being able to compute things in your brain or model a computation on a computer, and then the experience of being conscious.
So I don't know that I have this fully thought out, but so the universe is telling us all a story, right? We are the
Right.
listener, and we're there to experience this story that the universe is telling us. But
I like it.
there's times where you're not around to hear that story, but that story doesn't stop.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I like that a lot. I said
what it
something
feels like.
similar. Yeah, like on the patio, just kind of just thinking about it in a way that like it's happening whether I'm here or not. You know what I mean? Like the time, the flow of time or energy. I like how you described it as a story. The universe is telling a story, and yeah, it happens whether I'm here or not. So in Rupert Sheldrake's, or sorry, the moderator talking about if that's a transmission, if consciousness is somehow the story that's being told, and I'm just like tapping into it. Sometimes, sometimes I'm more perceptive, and I feel like it's truly that flow state. I would describe my experience with that flow state. I have described it to Kim in the past. Like it's just kind of, you said similar things. I think both of you said similar things about like, it's just happening through me almost. Like I'm not, it's the whole taking credit for the idea or whatever. Like the idea just happened. And I actually, this goes back to something you said before we started recording, Bob, about these things that happen because we're not aware of it. And then that made me think about the observer effect, right? Do you think that there's something to the whole idea that like it's working because we're not aware of it? Once we really try to like observe it and figure it out, it sort of falls apart. It doesn't work the same way.
Number one, that's a fascinating question. That might be the best question I've ever heard. That is so cool. I'm tingly just thinking about it. And number two, let's be specific on this observer effect. So we're talking about something like the double slit experiment, correct?
Yeah. Schrodinger's cat.
Schrodinger's cat or something like that. Okay.
Yeah.
So the observer, once a quantum state, a probabilistic state has been observed, it falls into it's called the collapse of the waveform.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what Penrose talks about, by the way. This is precisely so on the money. So what he thinks is the consciousness is the collapse of the waveform. So you have a quantum state that's probabilistic, that's ongoing, allowing you to have, let's say, your subconscious processing outcomes predictively. Let's go back to Anil. And what we're doing is hallucinating in a predictive model capacity.
Yeah.
We're trying to make predictions, and our experience is the hallucination of that prediction by your subconscious. And so the collapse of the waveform is, why am I experiencing it like this and not like that? Like, it's got to be one way. So let's say you're a downhill skier and you come upon a tree in the way, and it's equidistant on both sides, and you can model what it feels like to go left around the tree, or you can model what it feels like to go right around the tree. But your consciousness at some point or something is going to decide which way you go. You can't split the difference. Like, there comes a reality where you have to pick a side. You have to go left. You have to go right. If you stick with a 50-50 probability, you're going to hit the tree.
Yeah.
So the consciousness is this tiebreaker. It's this ability to collapse the waveform and finalize a number of probabilistic model predictions. But going back to the fact that it's a hallucination, imagine your model is coinciding with reality. Everything works smoothly. But if there's a dysfunction, psychedelics involved, maybe brain tumors, your model may lose its coherence with simulating reality. And you might have to then consciously experience the model giving you improper predictions, which would be a true hallucination in the common sense, which would be very disconcerting. Could you imagine? You're not controlling your model. It feels real to you. All your life, it has been representative of reality. And right now, I'm going around the tree, both left and right and upside down at the same time.
Yeah.
And there's no way to pick a direction.
Yeah. You know, it makes me think of those. You ever do that thing where you have something spinning, like but it's in a pattern, and it's like a spiral pattern maybe, where you can just stare at it, stare at the middle and it's spinning. You can stare at it for like 30 seconds or something. And then you look at what'd you say?
Like a fixed pattern that begins to move in your visual field?
Well, when you look at something else, like your eyes get used to the movement or something, and then you look at the back of your hand, and it's like,
yes,
the relatable thing. It's like I've, in my younger days experimented with mushrooms and LSD, and like that's what's happening. It's like the back of my hand is moving the way that I remember when I was in high school when I took mushrooms. It's the same things happening. Like I know my hand's not really moving that way, but it definitely looks and feels or whatever like that's really happening.
It's real to you. And there is a very interesting process that's going. I'll refer back to, I don't recall the podcast, but it was a Lex Friedman podcast with a neuroscientist who was studying the effects of psychedelics. And the way he described it was you have neurotransmitters and neuroreceptors. And for a given signal, you could use a given transmitter and it's received by a receiver. And imagine like a pitcher and a catcher. And the pitcher's throwing fastballs and the catcher's catching them for a strike. When you use a psychedelic, a true psychedelic, it's like the pitcher is now throwing what you thought was that same pitch, but you're catching it in a different location, meaning the receptor's a different receptor, it's a different transmitter. You're still getting a signal.
Yeah.
But it's not predictable the way it normally is. And you are literally being tricked by the difference in like the targeted receptors of your signal.
Yeah.
And so
cool.
all your reality breaks down and you can't predict anymore what is going to happen next. And that's
another relatable, I bet you guys can relate, but this is like maybe a dying thing, but 3D glasses when we were younger, right? The red side and the blue side, that fit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Here's what I'm talking about. Did you ever just keep those on just cuz why not? Did you ever do that where you just had them on and you just looked at everything? It wasn't a movie, you just looked at the whole world through these red and blue lenses. Yeah. So what I remember I'm going somewhere with this, but having them on for a certain amount of time and then taking them off. So let's say the left eye was the red eye and the right eye was the blue eye. When I took them off, if I closed one eye, like let's say I closed my right eye, which was the blue lens, like everything has a red tint. It's like the opposite color. It's like my eyes are overcompensating for the shades that have been going in each eye or something. Did you guys ever do that? Where you close one eye and you see the opposite color? Everything kind of has that tint, but just if you close one eye. Did you guys ever do that?
No, I can't say I did, but
so where I was, let me finish this other thing and then I'm curious what you're gonna say. But in my adulthood with the hot tub, like I've experienced, it's got to be the same kind of thing. There's different color lights, and I first noticed it with like this aqua blue color that if I stared at it, just like as if I had the 3D glasses on my head for 10 minutes or whatever, if I just stare at it, and not 10 minutes, even 2-3 minutes, and then I looked around, like everything had a reddish tint to it. It was very gnarly. And then there's a green light, and it's the same thing. For whatever reason, the green light, stare at it for a while. It's like my rods or cones or whatever are, I don't know, getting like an overload of the green color, and then it's compensating it somehow. When I look up, there's like a magenta tint to the whole world. It's really gnarly. And by the way, I've done that like sober. I know it's not like I know it's not like a.
I know of a process that kind of approximates what you're talking about. I don't know if it's the same thing, but your eye moves at a very, very, very tiny level very quickly all the time. Like your eye is never steady. is always jiggling around very, very, very minutely, very tinily. And because your signal is essentially stuck, like you whatever picture your eye gives you at any one time, that's what you see forever and always, unless it moves. Like your eye has to move to get another picture and another picture, another picture. And I'm wondering if, like, if you're staring at something and you get, like you said, your rods or cones, you're completely saturated in that one color, but you look somewhere else, it's going to take a certain number of jiggles essentially to overwrite what has been completely saturated in your perceptive field.
Yeah.
So you kind of like have to overwrite all the magenta or whatever that has been completely, like every pixel in your visual field has been coded as such. And so when you move away, you kind of have to wiggle your eye. I mean, not consciously, obviously, it's a super tiny level where the wiggling kind of rebuilds the picture in that you're remapping it over and over and over again.
Yeah. Very like cool to think about. So,
well, it's also like the image that you have is kind of still. Like it's always moving, but your consciousness is of a still process. So you have a stabilization device, and your nose, which is always in your field of view, is edited out.
Yeah, right.
There's all these different processes that are ongoing, meaning the actual signal getting from your eyeball into what you're aware of is like 5%. So your visual cortex is simulating about 95% of the signal of your awareness. About 5% is true photons that have gone into your eyeball, into your retina, on your optic nerve, into your brain, and floated around for your awareness of what the color red is, all this stuff. So much is processed that it allows the hallucination effect to be much more dramatic than the real effect. So you get this concept of awareness, and then you have a concept of dreaming, and they're the same thing. Okay, your dream state is your virtual awareness. You have all the same sensory, it feels the same, such that you can be tricked into believing it's real, at least for a short amount of time. Okay, it's so virtual, it can trick you. And my point is, the reason why it can trick you is because the real world is a dream. The real world is your internal experience. And this gets to the heart of this conversation, right? Are you experiencing the audience as inside your head, or are they really out there when you think about them later on? I mean, do you remember that question in the debate where they were kind of discussing consciousness, whether it's the signal and your brain is the radio tuning in, or it's all derived inside your brain mass itself. The real question is, does it have an ability to project out? Right?
Yeah.
Does it have a way that you can look at something, or a phantom limb, or what were the other examples I'm trying to think of?
Scopaesthesia, the sense that someone is staring at you.
Yes, and knowing who's calling you, right?
Yeah.
Like, so if someone calls you and predicting, what if we're talking about Tucker and then he calls us right now? That must mean there's some signal going on, right? So there's all. I think that's a very interesting conversation and unique to this dialogue. I don't think I'd heard another conversation in that quality and on that topic, that scope. Very fascinating. I'd like to hear your guys' opinion on that concept of the projection of the consciousness outside the body.
Well, before we get into that, I want to speak on, I really like the radio concept because I think it speaks to the dream state. Whereas when we are awake, we are tuning into a station. Like, we are focused on what we're doing, what we have to accomplish at the moment, whatever. When we're asleep, we're just receiving the signal, right? And it's
same signal, or do you think, because you said like tuned in while we're awake, is it the same thing? Is it the same thing when you're sleeping, or you think it's a different thing maybe?
I think we have less. I think we have less ability to focus on what signal we're receiving when we're asleep. And dreams are fascinating to me. When I was a child, and I don't remember age range, fairly young, but I had a reoccurring dream that I just called my nightmare wolf. And this wolf
Mm.
would come into my room and attack me, right?
Whoa.
And like I could feel it like literally like eating into my abdomen, right?
Whoa.
There is no real world experience that I had that would make that dream that real, right?
Mm.
Totally.
And I had this dream reoccurring for probably several years. I'm speculating. I don't recall. I was too young. But one time in that dream, I killed that wolf, and I never dreamed about it again.
Wow. Dude, I didn't know
Whoa.
that. I didn't know that. You must have been real young, right? I mean, because we've known
Yeah,
each
I
other
mean,
since like fifth, sixth
fairly young.
grade.
I
So
mean, I would say possibly. I think probably before school aged. Like,
yeah.
but I
Okay.
remember that to this day. Like,
Wow, that is so
that's
neat.
like a core memory for me. And
Oh,
then
poor memory.
I had this, and it's weird. Like I had this other reoccurring dream that would wake me up like terrified out of a dead sleep. And it's one of those things where it's like I remember the point I would wake up, but I can't form that image in my head. Like I know it's in there.
Hmm.
It has to be in there, but like my brain won't pull it up. And the closest I can get to it is like I feel like I was in the presence of three enormously powerful beings.
Wow.
That's as close as I can get to like what that dream was. Like I know it's my brain created it. It's in my head. But I
And you've intentionally tried. It's because you did describe it as like waking up terrified. I was curious if it's did that keep you from trying harder? Like, did you feel like you were starting to get close and like, oh, this is scary. I don't want to keep trying to conjure this image up, or
no, I mean as an adult, like I would like access to that information. Like
yeah,
I would like to know what was so terrifying. Like,
yeah.
did those three beings say something? Like, did they do something?
Hey, let me
I,
ask you
I don't
real
know.
quick. Let me ask you real quick. This is an interesting little side carrot. What about hypnosis?
Mm,
Mm,
Is that not this bridge between being unconscious and being conscious? And
right.
is it a real thing? Is it a real place? What is it if it is? What do you guys think about that?
Have either of you done it?
I've
no,
not.
and
I haven't
I've
either.
always had the opinion without any real world data to like form that opinion that I would not be susceptible to hypnosis.
Yeah.
I think it is
I've
a
always
range,
felt
by
that
the
way.
way.
I've
I
always
think
felt
there,
that way.
don't they say there's a range of people and some are um, you know, some are very easily able to fall into a hypnotic state, and some
Yeah.
people are
It's kind of
resistant to it.
power. Yeah, it's kind of power of suggestion, isn't it? I mean, like, just Tucker, I think your stance of like just knowing and believing that, it seems much more likely that you wouldn't be just because you're already thinking like
Yeah.
this isn't going to work for me, right? Whereas like if somebody's like, oh man, this sounds I mean, I could foresee like maybe um the factor of like wanting it to happen so much that then it ruins it, almost like the observer effect maybe, where there's some maybe balance in there. But I haven't had hypnosis, but at the Ren Fair,
Yep.
Renaissance Festival in Larkspur, Colorado, there's a hypnotist every year, I think, since I've been going as a child. And I think my dad did it once. I can't remember for sure. It's kind of weird. I mean, this would be like, yeah, back uh, early early years of my life probably. But I'm pretty sure my sister for sure did it one year. But I don't think I was there when my sister did. I think maybe she went with some friends. but I heard about it and it worked for her, if I remember right. Like
Wow.
I believe like my sister would be honest and wouldn't say like, no,
Totally.
he told me to act. He told me to just, lay into it and
Well,
trick everyone. Like if that was the case, I believe she would have said so. And she said no, she doesn't really remember what was happening, but she was doing the things. Because what I should just elaborate a little bit more. The hypnotist, he doesn't do just one person. He gets a whole like 9 or 10 people on stage, and he hypnotizes all of them. And so like they all kind of fall asleep. It's like a counting thing, and they all kind of like just are motionless. And so one at a time, he'll kind of just be like, okay, you stand up, pretend you're playing a trombone or whatever, like, and they all do it. Like I've seen it. I've probably seen bits of it every year that I've gone. and so, to be fair, that means I haven't seen all of it. It would be interesting to talk to someone who said like maybe someone like Tucker, who's like, yeah, I was too super skeptical. I didn't think it would work, and it didn't. I just sat there and be like, dude, it's not working. I haven't heard of those experiences, but I'm sure that has to have happened.
I'm thinking more of like on a clinical setting of someone, sitting in a dark room.
Oh, yeah.
Like where someone's trying to explore. Here's what I was getting at. Like, if those memories are retrievable of Tucker's, of the three powerful beings, maybe it would be a hypnotic state that would allow him to see and describe them for the first time. Meaning it's in a place, and I'm using air quotes, you cannot see, not consciously. And you have to slip into some other realm, so to speak, air quotes again, to be able to, like, let me go back a stage. So we were talking about previously and many times before, we will continue. The conversation makes the thought emergent. Like it comes from the conversation itself. So we think we're having these ideas. Meaning, if you ask me after this podcast, did you think up the things you said? I would have to say, of course. But my proposition is, if I'm talking in real time, something that's not rehearsed, it's not memorized, it's off the top of my head in real time, what I'm doing is translating the signal from my subconscious, which is giving me the cues of what to say next. This is indefinite. It goes on your whole life. And in the real world experience of this, you having the conversation is what allows you to see the ideas and speak them and bring them to life. This is what creates the concept in the reality of real time.
Like in the moment.
In the moment, exactly. You could not have written it down. You couldn't have, thought it to yourself in the shower. You couldn't have now you could have these ideas, but it's not the same way. It's not going to be spoken the same way exactly. So going back to this idea of being in a hypnotic state, well, maybe it's emergent in a different way, a deeper way. Like maybe it's a focused way of seeing, because I try this really hard. I call it a frame rate, going back to Fight Club.
Oh, yeah. So
Fight Club, you've got Tyler Durden cutting in pornographic frames into a kid's movie, essentially.
Right.
And it's
Bing.
like 24.
It's all like
fucking genius. Love that movie.
Genius, because he's the projector. He's the projection. Okay, the projectionist is the metaphor. So the projectionist is your subconscious. Your consciousness is in the audience.
Yeah.
He's giving you a signal 1 per 24 frames. And what I'm saying is the hypnotic state is maybe increasing your frame rate. So maybe you're still only going to get 1 frame every 24. But if you're now playing at 10,000 frames a second, you can now see the thing.
Wow, I like how you said that, man. That really that maybe the hypnosis is speeding it up. So
in
like
effect,
more frames.
If it's truly happening. Now I'm not conflating that with the sideshow version, which I think is happening, but maybe for different reasons. I think that's more of a social I have a big thing obviously about the human evolution and being, like the plural of humans is mob. Like a mob of humans historically is what we were, and you would conform to the mob's expectations unequivocally if you wanted to survive. Let's just say throughout all of, the human lineage, that's key. So I think there's a lot of pressures there to play along, and even unconscious though, even unconsciously shows. Like if you get called up and there's a bunch of people looking at you, evolutionarily, that's public speaking. That would be akin to you're about to die. If you're not the king of the tribe or whatever, if you're not the chief or the priestess, you're probably going to die. Like there's not a lot of options for you when everybody's looking at you. It feels a certain kind of way. Okay. Like if you're up on stage, and by the way, John, you and I have had this conversation, maybe Tucker, I think we were all on that podcast, where I'm in awe of at least one thing objectively with you guys as being performers. So call back. These are heavy metal musicians. We're on the podcast right now. And you guys perform in front of others. And so being a normal human, meaning I'm not one who gets up on stage, it terrifies me, or it gives me a feeling of trepidation to conceive of everybody's eyeballs on me. No matter where I look, left, right, up, down, all the way around, everybody's going to be looking right at me. And I think, John, you had mentioned once, like, that's what you liked, right? You liked that feeling.
Particularly because it wasn't just me. Like, I believed so much in what we were doing, like the songs we were writing and the show we were putting on, and like that we were all so excited about doing it. Like it didn't seem like it was something I had to try very hard to get over. It was just like, this is what we're doing. Like I had this dream to be the next Pantera, and like we were doing the steps to kind of fulfill the dream. So it didn't seem hard at all to me. It seemed like, I mean, don't get me wrong, like the fear was there. I suppose it's probably accurate to say before every for every show, before those first couple notes, before the first song, while we're just kind of waiting, I was like pacing back and forth. I was just sort of like, it was kind of hard to just stand still, because I was like, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. But then as soon as it started, it was just like autopilot, for the next 45 minutes or whatever. And, so fun.
Power. It sounds powerful, maybe not fearful. Like it's filled with power in such a way.
I used that word too, like thinking about it, and it was the cyclical, the idea of it being cyclical, the idea of it being like we're putting off an energy. There was a band we played with, I think their name was Drop. It's so gnarly I can remember that, because that was like in the first year or so that we played, so that's over 20 years ago. And we only played a couple shows with them, and then I don't know if they went in to do other bands, but it was Drop, DROPP. I don't know how I remember that, but their singer, I remember he made such a good point. He was so good at like describing he said 50-50. He's like, we give 50%, you guys give 50%. And magically we will all have this like energy flowing between, back and forth between us while we're playing. He was really like charismatic in that way. Maybe that goes back to the crowd thing you were talking about, Bob. Like sometimes, and I know we've talked about this too, Tucker, sometimes when a singer is like, everybody jump up, and Tucker, you're like, no, that's not me. I'll be back here.
That
like,
goes back to what we were talking about before we started recording, where it's just like the automatic no.
Yeah.
The automatic no.
Instant
I
negate.
am
that was
not
Bob
a crowd participation person. I can't tell you why, but I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. Not for
Put
one
your
to
hands
ruin
up.
anything, but like, you're like, I'll be back here doing my thing.
But I think that the case still stands, though, that you guys are the exception, not the rule. Meaning, if everybody's performing, then there's no crowd, and that's not cool either. So the function of the crowd is, as a numbers game, 99%. The function of the performer is the 1%. But what I think we're trying to get to is that this relationship between the 1% and the 99% is powerful. Powerful. It could be fear. It could be scary. You could be afraid. It could be it could make you act like you've never acted before, for good or for ill.
That's why I like the word power there. And it's like, here's another opportunity for a shot. In Billions and Billions, Carl Sagan has the quote, with great power comes great responsibility. I mean, in the common or the modern kind of lore of today, I think a lot of people would associate that with Spider-Man, because that's been in like every Spider-Man movie. I think all the reboots and all of them, there's some allusion
Yeah, I
to
thought
that
that was
same phrase.
Stan Lee wrote that, I thought.
Well, see, the first Spider-Man, so I don't know if that was in the Spider-Man comics for back then. I don't know that much. I know Tucker and we've talked about this. For sure, the first Spider-Man movie where that was
I'm not talking the movie. It was my understanding was Stan Lee wrote that in the original.
in the comics. Okay.
Yes.
Because I know because I was just gonna say Billions and Billions came out before that Spider-Man movie, so I did wonder if it was something. But yeah, I think Tucker, you'd said you'd heard that maybe even Carl Sagan pulled that from something else. Someone else originally said that. But my point is, like, I believe there's a lot of truth to that recognizing power and then recognizing the importance of being responsible with it and not, using that power to manipulate
my brother
people into do,
My brother, that's humanity. That's the definition of human. Literally.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
the whole thing distilled into, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay. Animals have great power. Polar bears, tremendous power. Orca whales, unbelievable power. They don't care about responsibility. It's not in their, maybe I'm overstating for orcas. Maybe they have a level of responsibility. But let's just say for the vast majority of non-human animals, I don't think responsibility is an abstraction they're aware of. There's survival. Okay.
Yeah, just instinct. Yeah.
No, not just instinct. Not just instinct, but they have no expectation of death. They have no expectation of their own mortality. They have no expectation of time before their beginning. They have no expectation of any of these abstractions that require one to conceptualize responsibility. Responsibility is the concept of this shared existence. Okay, let's piggyback off of this to the hard problem of consciousness. I think it's such an interesting concept of how is this so unique? Like, how is this a one-off thing? How is it that our toaster is not conscious? Now, the concept of panpsychism obviously would flip that on its head and say everything is conscious. So we can have that debate, right? But let's
should I read this like hard, because I did put this. I did
please. I think
take the effort to.
Yeah,
David. Important. I didn't like read too much into who David Chalmers is. I think I've read the name before, but I think
I've listened to him on many podcasts about consciousness.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and he's kind of the one credited with coining the hard problem of consciousness. It looks like maybe in 95, but it's the problem of explaining the relationship between physical phenomena such as brain processes and experience. So phenomenal consciousness or mental states or events within phenomenal qualities or qualia. Why are physical processes ever accompanied by experience? Why does a given physical process generate the specific experience it does? Why does an experience of red why an experience of red rather than green, for example? So a lot of words there, but yeah, what I get from the hard problem is like, how do we explain it, right? Like, why does it? I don't know how. I guess how would you guys kind of
start with the concept of just atoms? Okay, like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, just these atoms of these elements that are not conscious without panpsychism. So let's take out panpsychism. So let's just say you have inanimate matter. And then you combine these atoms into a certain configuration. And then it's a human with a mind and experiences. Yeah, hello. So, and then that human, by the way, will eventually, as far as we know, eventually turn into atoms once again. And then those atoms could be taken up by another human or another creature, gorilla or something, and it could become conscious again and then go back. And so it's this concept, obviously, of how is inanimacy turned into an animate thing ever? How is that? That's the heart. How is it ever possible to take something that is fundamentally all the individual pieces without panpsychism, inarguably not a conscious thing? It's not making decisions. It doesn't feel what it feels like to look at the color red.
Yeah.
But if you put them in a certain pattern, boom, this thing happens. So that is this hard problem.
To go back to Penrose. I think one of the last things I watched on YouTube with him was when he was talking about that waveform collapsing. And do you remember what he? Because I think we talked about this a little bit, but do you remember what he was saying? I think his current kind of theory is that causes the waveform to collapse. Do you remember what it was?
I just thought it was the microtubules. It was somehow it was this interaction with this very fine structure in the brain.
I'm sure. I think in this last video I saw, I think he was proposing that it's actually gravity that causes it to happen.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Which is very interesting to sort of like
quantize gravity. Yes, that's it.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
but again, it's like, well, so to.
But would you presume then? I think you would have to presume you would need a brain then. So this is one of the processes of like defining the thing. So panpsychism, it's inherent in the substance itself, or in the nature of the substance, or in the nature of the universe, that all things are conscious, and only when you get to an organized state like a human are you conscious in a human way. But trees are conscious, and rocks are conscious, and everything obviously. But then there's the concept of, if it's going to be gravity assisted collapse of the wave function in the microtubules, that presupposes a brain. So can we all agree or disagree, or I'd like your opinion on the record if you want to put one. Do you think it requires a brain to be conscious?
I'm too fascinated by like the possibilities to settle on. I mean, if you told me I had to, really, if you told me I have to, I would bow out. I'd be like, sorry, I'm not picking one or the other. It's so cool. I mean,
so you're the position of what was the female presenter? What was her name? I apologize.
Tanya Lerman.
Yeah, she seemed. She said she was like epistemologically ambivalent or something like that, right? She wanted
ontological neutrality.
Thank you.
Actually, it's so funny because Kim and I were talking about that last night. I can't remember how it came up, but it was like, she used that term, trying to be ontologically neutral, which seems like a great position to take when you're trying to approach things in a scientific manner,
It's fair. Fair. Yeah.
Try to like really try not to be like biased one way or the other.
I'm trying to put a gun to your head and say, pick a side, John.
It seems like it more likely that a brain is even what I would say is, like, if nothing else, even just as the receiver. Yeah, I think the brain is involved in consciousness. But so here's a question. Well, sorry, Tucker, you.
Tucker, what's your position?
What's your take?
Well, before I give you my take, I have to explain something that I've always felt. People say they have a set of beliefs, right? And I've always felt that's wrong. I feel like your beliefs should change based on experience, right?
And time.
Time.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying I believe this. I'm just saying that it makes sense to me in the moment. But people describe going places that feel off. You want a creepy building, a Civil War battleground. It feels off. Like
Poltergeist,
you were there to experience the things that happened there, but you get this overwhelming feeling that just pushes you away. So I'm going to take the stance at this present time that maybe you don't have to have a brain to have that type of consciousness, that maybe just the earth, the land, the wood, having experienced what it did, retains that somehow.
Somehow admits it.
And somehow sends that information back to you in a way you don't understand.
Yeah. I was going to ask this. I love the way you preface that by saying, like, well, it makes sense right now, but the just sort of the absurdity of, like, the rigidness sometimes. Yeah, I think it's really helpful every so often for probably every human to just kind of consider their beliefs over time and think, is this something I've just believed all along? Because just to quote the Matrix Resurrections, Trinity's like, I always knew I wanted kids, but actually, how do you know if you really want something or if your upbringing programmed you to want it? So anyway,
I have a very good example of the beliefs thing, and it just happened this week. I saw online somewhere somebody talking about Def Leppard, and it immediately brought into my head the old joke, "What has 9 arms and sucks?"
Def
Right?
Leppard.
Def Leppard.
Shit.
I loved that joke 20 years ago. I
Oh,
loved
You're not
it.
a drummer though. You're not.
I
A drummer,
loved
so
it.
you can't-
But when I thought about that joke this week, I was like, I don't like it anymore.
Yeah, isn't that
Because
interesting?
because now I'm looking at it from a viewpoint where it's like this dude lost an arm
Yeah,
and still found a way to do
to
what
kick
he
ass.
loved doing.
Yeah,
That's
and
so
and
inspiring. Like that's
totally,
so fucking cool that he did that.
and
Where
yeah,
20 years ago it's just like, ha, he's got one arm.
yeah, right. It's so gnarly to think about the things that do and don't hold up or whatever. But in addition to Rick Allen, I think is his name, right? In addition to his, determination to, well, I can do a lot with my feet and one hand. Like, why can't, to stick with it. In addition to that, the rest of the band was like, yeah,
True.
you're our
Yeah,
drummer.
so cool.
We're gonna,
True.
yeah. What can we,
That happened the way it did.
one of the greatest like band stories of all time when you think about it, you know what I mean? And yeah, so it's interesting how I don't want to get too lost in this side carrot because I do think this is an opportunity for a whole episode, just humor in general. I'm really fascinated. But yeah, this kind of mindset of like, well, it's just a joke, like, like lighten up. It's just funny, just laugh. Compared to like recognizing, like you just said, Tucker, like recognizing the sort of change that you've had where, yeah, it doesn't actually seem funny
John,
anymore. It's
John,
like, if anything, it's
John,
kind of like,
let me
it's way cooler
introduce.
to be inspired by it than just haha.
Yeah.
Well, hold on. Don't think about it. Cool. Let me introduce or reintroduce this concept of the flowchart of cognition. And it starts with an input signal from the outside world going into your subconscious model. Then there's an output that your consciousness becomes aware of. And then if the predictive model is inaccurate, you update the loss, which changes your weights. So
Yeah.
as the next input comes in,
Right.
and the reason why I bring this up is I propose the laughter is the social cue that I'm updating my weights.
Hmm.
And so the joke evolves over time in what is humorous because the culture of weights updates over time. So
Yeah.
the humor is relative to the standard, right? The humor is relative to the typical or the norm, the allowable. And then the humorist pokes fun at that thing and it looks at it from different angles that surprise you. And so the laughter then is your signal to the world that something is happening right now that's updating your weights. And so it's so fascinating.
Wow.
The comment by Tucker of saying, hey, over time, there's this one very specific joke and it feels different over time. How is that possible? I think it's such a perfect crystallization of this concept.
Yeah.
That even the humor of a single joke will evolve over a single person's lifetime based on their model and their weights to their own model.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's, it's the whole woke thing, which we could do 10 episodes on that.
Sure. Yeah.
But there's these comedians out there, and I'm not going to name names. There's many of them, but they get up on stage and they go, I can't talk about this anymore. And then they talk about it.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you still can, but large segments of society have updated their weights.
Yeah.
And you're just saying, I refuse to do that, and I still want to punch down at this.
But Tucker, hold on one second. I think it's totally a fair point, but how many people realize they're Maggie?
Yeah, exactly.
So this is what happens is the passivity of the crowd absorbing the signal. And once again, we go back to performer and audience. This is a ubiquitous concept where we have like a single or focused point of view consumed in a mass amount, and it becomes really fucky. Like if I sit down with either you or anybody on this planet, we drink a beer, I don't think I can ever look someone in the eye and not see their humanity. All right. When you have mass communications where you're intoxicated by the power, not of audience in the thousands to you guys being up on stage, but imagine tens, hundreds of thousands, millions. I couldn't imagine the feeling of power. And I couldn't imagine being corrupted by that feeling of power. Where's the responsibility? Okay, there's no responsibility. Humans are not evolved for this level of power. Ergo, they cannot be responsible.
Well, and I thought of this concept earlier on, and you saying what you did kind of leads to me saying what I'm about to say. But art, music, comedy, whatever. Okay, creating it yourself, that's masturbation, right? But sharing it with somebody is sex. And what I think, like especially some of these comedians don't realize is you can't have sex the same way you masturbate. There's more than one person involved now. Like
there's this thing called consent.
You have to be receptive to what the other person wants at that point.
Fascinating.
And you can't just you can't just get up there and masturbate and go, this works for you.
Yes.
I like you have I love that.
You have to like get on stage and do something that works for you and the crowd.
And
like it's such an interesting take, because let me explain how powerful that is. When we have this performer crowd dynamic, we assume it's sex. But I think that's an error, because you can have this other thing, which is, the orgasm, let's say, to continue the metaphor, without having the sex. You can do it with masturbation. It's a purely principled idea of what is happening, I think, which is the power of the communication, meaning not to do a value judgment on whether your masturbation is beautiful or not. But it's a different thing when you're having sex. It's just a completely different thing, because other people are involved. And so when you're communicating these ideas, it's really contributing to that cultural uptake, because we talked about this as well. Well, there's a symbiotic living thing with us, which is our culture, and it's effectively alive. And so the reproduction of the sexual interaction is the cultural baby, to kill this metaphor and pound it to the ground. But I think that is so appropriate, in that what we're trying to do is reproduce. Versus the definition of masturbation is it's like a sterile thing. It's just for you and you alone, which is such a beautiful conceptual differentiation between those ideas.
Yeah.
Well,
good call, man.
Man, I really, really wish I remembered which book this came from, and it might have been a Sagan, but I can't say for sure. But a book I read in my early 20s actually described memes before like it was a cultural phenomenon like we just understand memes today.
I think it was Dawkins, the selfish gene.
I think you're actually right. Yeah. But I mean, he talked about it as being related to genes, where it's like we're putting this concept out there into society that almost becomes part of the bigger whole, like
part of the zeitgeist, right?
Yeah, I mean, we put it out there as a joke. It's just a meme, but there's an uptake, like it becomes part of society and culture as the whole. And I'm gonna have to try to find that, because the way he described it was very on the nose. Like I really liked it.
It's got a reproductive quality.
It does.
Self-reproductive, and that's what becomes viral. And here's my take-home message. And I think Dawkins in the book as well, is that we're not evolved for this, meaning, or we are evolved. This is part of our evolution, but now the technological level of exploitation of this part of our evolution is unbound. I mean, this is nothing.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's like
We're catching up to
100
it, but it's like,
dude,
yeah.
it's like 100 years, man. It's been like 100 years of this stuff, maybe, of like rapid growth and acceleration of growth of interconnectivity,
Yeah.
of networking, just the sharing of ideas, not even what the ideas are, or whatever. It's just the amount of people that are being alive and having experiences and being able, going back to the not sharing the joke, right? How many people didn't share the joke before? Meaning all globally, like how many people had a little tiny, you had 3 or 4 people, you have this awesome joke, you tell them the joke, and it lives and dies with that little group of 5 people. And what's happening is we're getting to the point where like everybody gets their 15 minutes of fame, like Warhol says, right? Everybody's gonna have 15 minutes of fame. It's just going to become your viral contribution to the zeitgeist. Everybody's going to have a little tiny piece. But think about how many people there are going to be, 8, 10, 12 billion people. And they're all going to have a lifetime. And then there's going to be another 8, 10, 12 billion people after that having a lifetime. And it's going to get crazy here real quick. The amount of contributions and how contributing to the cultural organism, both like on the national level and the global level, how that's going to evolve, meaning this gene, the selfish gene, wants to reproduce itself. We have to be aware that it is playing a game. It is participating actively in modifying behavior such that those that behave in a conducive way to the idea, they get a benefit and there's a fitness to them and they extend to the next level. And that's how these ideas grow or shrink and die.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Well, and I think with global communication and social media and such, it's like, I think it brought to the forefront, okay, I can tell a joke and 5 people laugh at it. Well, with us all being connected, you tell a joke now and somebody is going to go, let me tell you why I find that hurtful.
Mm.
Whereas, when we aren't all digitally connected, you may never hear that voice.
Yeah.
That says, this is why I don't think that's funny.
Yeah.
And I think there's it's very hard as a human to say, you know what? I understand where you're coming from, and I should change the way that I talk about things or what I joke about because I don't want to be hurtful.
Yeah.
It's much easier just to go, well, you're just woke. Like,
yeah,
you're just silly.
I got a question. This is perfect. Okay, let me ask. What if the part of the consciousness that is not inside our heads, if we all say, or most of us or some of us say that the brain is the consciousness and the brain's in your head, what if the culture has a consciousness? And what if the culture can change its mind? Like over time. And it's just like literally just if you aggregate all the individual conversations of 1 billion people or 10 billion people, that's literally the consciousness of the culture.
Yeah, I can get behind that. I think it's like it speaks to like the whole idea of like spreading awareness. It's like
interesting.
Just like Tucker, you said, like if you weren't connected, if you were in your own, and people, this exists today. Like, the first thing that came to mind was like the Amish culture. Like they're kind of closed off, right? Or you could maybe point to like North Korea, like as a whole country, they're sort of like not connected to what's happening in the rest of the planet in a way. Like it's, how else would you know? How else would you know that there's these other experiences? So, well, I like how you were saying it, Tucker. And for me, what I would say is, I just think it's so important for people to, at some point in their life, just kind of recognize the importance and the responsibility, especially with like communication and the internet and the the power to just be thoughtful, with the things that they think, say, I don't think it's necessarily a matter of like, you can't do that anymore. I think it's much more of like, why is that exist in the first place? Like, is that something that's worth repeating, that joke? Is it something as time has come and gone and there really isn't any use out of it anymore? I think just being thoughtful and doing the work to think about that stuff. This is where I'm at in my life anyway. That I think that's much more important than just trying to find these boundaries. You can't do that anymore. You like this. This isn't okay anymore. The thought experiment that I'd come up with a while ago, I think I've actually done it with both of you, but may as well take the opportunity to share this in the ether. But it occurred to me this way, that like, it's all about the words, right? Like, what do the words mean? And so I thought about, if I could really try to like put myself in a quiet mind state, right, where I'm really empty mind, nothing is there, just be as sort of empty as possible. And out of the emptiness, I make fun of something. I make fun. There was nothing, and now there's fun. I made fun of something. Awesome. And so now take two, do it again, and I make fun of somebody. I make fun of somebody else. I make fun of an other, right? Well, now I think it gets much more interesting and complex, because who am I making fun of? I'm making fun of my best friend that I've known my whole life, and it's good-natured ribbing, and we're just talking shit, and we know there's love there, even though I'm making fun. Well, okay, there's like, I've known him my whole life or whatever, like there's a small gap, like it's easier to be flexible. But if I'm making fun of, a North Korean that I don't know any North Koreans, I don't have any, personal experience, like the gap is so huge. I think that's where like the power and the responsibility comes in, is like, I mean, again, this is just where I'm at in my life, but I think it's so much more important to be thoughtful about what am I making fun of this other that's so far out of my experience that maybe it's a little irresponsible to try to just like find humor where it's so far out there. Maybe I want to be a little more thoughtful. Like, is this a joke that I want to repeat? Because maybe if, in other words, like if that gap wasn't so big, if I did know, somebody who escaped North Korea and said it was the worst experience, I'm so much better off. Like maybe that wouldn't be funny at all. Like Def Leppard 20 years later, you know what I mean?
It wouldn't feel the same way. Meaning you wouldn't laugh. Okay. And this is very important. The distinction between those people that are telling the joke to get a laugh versus the people that are making up the joke, let's just say. So how many people that tell the joke have made up that joke? I think is probably less, 0.1%. It's probably
who masturbated the joke themselves, who's just trying to like get in on the orgy afterwards, right?
Correct.
That makes sense, right?
Only one has sex. Yeah, the rest are just masturbating to the idea. But here's my point. The human learns just like an LLM, quote unquote, learns. Okay, after it, then because of it. So there's the fallacy that, well, let's just stay on this target of, I can tell a joke where it's in another language and I don't know what the words mean, but if I pronounce it just right, I could kill the room every night and be a famous comedian in Poland or whatever. It doesn't matter necessarily. So a lot of people are telling the joke because of the value of the response. It's such a powerful tool to break the ice or to get ahead or to build a in-group and out-group and all this stuff that evolves in human nature to be on a tribe and to protect the tribe of all costs. And you want to be on that tribe and you want to be valuable. And one of the ways you're valuable is you update other people's weights. And the way you update their weights is by telling them something that makes them laugh. Now, you don't have to know what that thing is. If it's corollary, if it just works, because after this, then this happens. And I'm saying there's another level, which is the person. Well, let me ask you this. And this probably goes back to the selfish gene. How do these things, how are they created in that? Or is it ever something intentional that you can create this joke? See, I think it's not. I think someone had the joke first spontaneously pop in a la Fight Club projectionist style into their head.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to the drummer of Def Leppard. And they did this thing, the 9 arms and the 10. All right. Okay. The 9 arms. Someone had that visualization and it made them chuckle. Okay. They told it to the next guy. It made him chuckle. He told it. Obviously, you know where I'm going with this. And it just goes like that. Nobody sat down and said, I'm going to write this viral joke now.
Yeah.
And here it goes. I think, obviously they're professional comedians. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm saying like these cultural mimetic transmissions are derived from the subconscious first. So back to you, John. If you want to have people be more thoughtful, meaning they're not laughing at the naughty jokes, what I think really should be done, this is my opinion, people become aware, and I think you share this opinion, aware of where the humor comes from. You're observing this thing, that's meaning if you're telling the joke, like, how did you figure this thing out? You didn't come up with it consciously. The first person who quote unquote wrote the joke, it came to them like a light bulb moment.
Yeah.
And so what I'm getting at is the culture just has to shift far enough that whoever has the first mimetic seed, their light bulb moment is hopefully not at the expense of other people. I mean, that's just, not a very valuable update to one's weights. But my point is, I don't think you can tailor the creativeness consciously. That's my take on it, and I'd like to hear your guys' opinion. I just don't think that creative side comes from a choice.
I think it could. By the way, I want to say I think Cultural Mimetic Transmissions sounds like an awesome album name for like Meshuggah or something. But anyway, yes, there you go. Anyway,
I could change the transmission to emission.
Oh yeah, because I think the word emergent, we've used that a lot, but there's a lot to that. This idea of the things that just are kind of spontaneous. Oh, here's a question. I know you were interested to hear our thoughts. This might kind of answer what you were asking, but in the debate, someone was making the point about fields. I think Anil was sort of oh shit, I'm drawing a blank on the word, but he was Rupert was talking about fields, right? Fields coming off of stuff, and Anil was like, well, yeah, obviously the brain does emit some kind of fields, like I think it's an MRI machine, right? I don't know, but whatever, we can scan brains, right? There is technology to detect these fields that are coming off of the brain through the skull. That was the point they were making, that these fields go from the brain through the skull, and we can perceive them.
Yeah, electromagnetic. It's like ECGs or something like that.
Yeah. And so I was curious, like, and this is probably getting too sci-fi and woo-woo, but like, well, what if consciousness is just another kind of field, but we just don't know how to detect it yet? We haven't developed the tool to actually see it. It's as invisible as anything else. We just haven't.
Yeah, I think
we haven't built the camera for it yet.
That's what I really like.
And what if when speculatively we develop the tool, what if that makes the waveform collapse?
Because
I've had this idea for a while in my quasi scientific religious beliefs. What if we finally figured out all the answers scientifically of how and why the universe exists, and the universe just goes, great, I don't need to exist anymore. He figured it out.
Yeah, well, I can quote one of my favorite lines in Dune. Jamis says, "The mystery of life isn't a problem to solve; it's a reality to experience."
Yes,
yeah,
that's beautiful.
Well, I would say that this kind of piggybacks off of what we were doing, Fermi paradox. We never really got to simulation hypothesis.
Oh yeah,
we
can maybe wrap up with that, because it's about an hour. We got about like 12 minutes to get
let's do that. Guys, did you ever contemplate that we are obviously simulated NPCs in someone else's video game?
Yeah.
A very smart
So
alien or something like that.
When I
right.
was
Yeah.
a kid, I had the idea that my life could just be a giant's dream.
A giant's dream, you said?
Yes. And so everything I experience is just another creature's dream. I can't disprove that. There's
Sure.
there's no way to disprove that. There's
Yeah.
no way to prove.
Plato's cave.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Is this just a simulation? Sure.
Yeah.
Does it change anything? I don't know that it does,
Yeah.
And that comes, I mean, the thing with simulation theory is it ties into free will, it ties into consciousness. Like, will we ever know that what we're experiencing is real? I don't know, but does it change anything?
Well,
Yeah.
what
I
if-
mean,
but
what if
you
someday
can
it
get
does? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It mattered to Neo once he got unplugged, like the red pill and the blue pill,
Right.
man.
True.
It's still a point.
Right. Right.
If I knew Kung Fu this whole time and I didn't know it, I'd be pretty upset.
I know. Yeah. You just get stuff
But-
uploaded.
But here's the point: is the human nature is in these nonsensical propositions, meaning things that you can never answer. It's not answerable. But I love the fact that this debate, introduced, I felt, the first credible hypotheses about consciousness outside of the brain, meaning fields that interact. And so let's end on that concept of looking at somebody feels like something, like right, that you can project.
To the person. Yeah. It feels like something to the person being looked at.
They feel
They feel something.
They feel your sight, right? So isn't that a weird thought, like to feel
It's
someone looking
totally
at
weird.
you? Yeah.
I
What do you
I
guys
meant
feel
to.
about that feeling of being looked at?
Yeah. I think I've experienced it for sure. I think I mentioned it last episode. In the debate, Rupert Sheldrake says he's going to have an app eventually to
Yes.
kind of and I couldn't find an app, but there is like a page on his website that you can sort of participate in this. I think it'll just go through 20 iterations where you set us up with somebody to when a person is doing the staring and one person is being stared at, blah blah blah. I haven't done it yet. I can't believe like all week. So I'm going to make a point to do that before next week. I want to do that with Kim or Jay or all three of us. I think it'd be like really fun to do. Because anyway, I think I have experienced. Sorry, I know I've experienced where like something feels like, what. Sorry, I have like too many things going. My mouth can't keep up with my brain. Or I've looked around and I'm like, somebody's looking at me. And, I've also experienced that with like insects and bugs and spiders in particular. It's like a spider sense almost.
That's
It's
cool.
like I'm downstairs and it's like I could just have this sense that like something's moving or something. And I look behind me or whatever, and there's a spider on the wall or something.
Back to Spider-Man, by the way. That's a weird.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And then the other thing that that I think is relevant to this idea, and I guess Kim came up with this. It's weird because we were like years ago, but we were talking about it just a couple weeks ago, and I thought John and James from the band, I thought it was their idea, but it's this idea when you're in a big crowd like in Las Vegas or somewhere like an airport, wherever there's a lot of people moving, in different directions or whatever, blah blah blah. If you just make a point to stare directly where you're going, and don't don't move your eyeballs around, but just stare in the direction you need to go, it's like parting the Red Sea. It's like everybody just moves out of your way like magically. Have you guys ever experienced that?
No, but that's very interesting.
Yeah,
I've never really thought about it, but
I would highly recommend
I
try
will
that
every
next time. Yeah, yeah. If you're like, seriously, if it was the more chaotic, I think the better. And this is just whatever anecdotal experience, I guess. I'm not. That's one of the reasons I like Rupert Sheldrake so much, is he seems like the kind of guy that had these ideas, but then wanted to do some, testing of it and wanted to see.
Well, hold on. We just talked for like 40 minutes about the power of the performer and the power of the audience. Like that's the foundation of this concept. Now, by the way, I don't believe it. I've not been convinced, but I do love the persuasive capacity in that I cannot refute it. And I do see the circumstantial evidence supporting it, meaning that this impact that humans have over evolutionary time in a social sense compared to an isolated sense, sex versus masturbation, it is so on the money. It's the thing, man. And there is this indisputable power of the idea, the mimetic quality and all this. Well, why isn't there a quality in the vision of a human being looking at you? I mean, or an insect. I like that as well. What if it's a jaguar looking at your back or something? I mean, these animals have eye spots on the back of their ears for a reason. Okay, being looked at behind you is equivalent to death. Okay, if you see somebody before they see you, in a jungle rule kind of sense, you have their life in your hands. To be able to visualize somebody and they don't have eyes on you is such a power dynamic. If there's any signal there at all, there could then be an evolutionary response to that signal for fitness. So I'm not saying I believe it, and I'm not saying, there's tremendous direct evidence, but I do like the concept, and I do like that there is some hypothesis testing going on.
Yeah, well, and I would, if you happen to think of it, I would encourage you to try it. In a couple weeks, you're going to Universal. You'll be in a big place with lots of people. If you think of it, I would be like, great to hear if you, in the moment, realize hey, let me just stare at, just to be clear, like the pseudoscience of it, or whatever, is about the lock of your vision on where you're going. Like if your eyes wander, it breaks it. Okay, that's so the hypothesis.
People don't want to break that vision, so they self-select out unconsciously. They feel like the gaze has power, and they want to, like the Eye of Sauron.
Yeah.
Like you lock on Eye of Sauron style, and all the hobbits will scurry.
Yep. I love it.
Now, my counter to that concept would be when you focus on where you're going, you're not paying attention to the subtle moves that you are doing. You're not actually walking in a straight line. You may feel like you are, but you're not actually walking a straight path. You're just ignoring all the side steps.
It's what do they call it? Like self-selection bias. Confirmation bias, excuse me, like confirmation bias, where it just feels that way because you're avoiding the path of everybody else unconsciously. I wonder
if I'm not describing it well enough, because I think the way that I understood it, again, it's gnarly because my memory is that John and James told me this, and Kim's like, no, I came up with that. It's like, well, shit, dude, I don't know where it came from for real. I mean, I'm more inclined to believe Kim. Her memory just in general, I think, is better than mine. But I think the point was, no, like it's not just that you're laser focused on where you're going, but that you are walking a straight line. I think that's the part I left out. I think it is the intent of, like, I can see the straight, quickest point from A to B, right?
Line
straight
of
point.
Sight.
Yeah, I can
line of sight. I got you.
Yeah. I think that's the idea of it, because again, it's this magic thing that people just move out of your way. Now, I should clarify, it's not that you're like charging and people have to because they'll get plowed down. It's like you're still walking in the normal flow with the rest of the salmon or whatever,
But what about this? What about this? Do you do a control where someone just walks and says, I'm not going to avoid anybody, they're going to avoid me, but just in random directions?
Yeah, we got to do this. We like over the next week or two. Let's like all
I'm going to
make a point to.
I'm going to tell one of the kids to lock eyes on me, walk to me. And I'll tell the other kid, I want you to just walk around, but don't move for anybody, and see what happens. I'll
Yes, please.
Because to me, it kind of reminds me of, I think it's cheetahs maybe, but if you watch like a cheetah run, their head is basically immobile. Like their body is moving, but their head is in a relatively fixed, stable position to keep that
line
frame of view steady. And I'm curious. I'm not saying this is the same thing, but I'm curious whether when you're focused like that, whether your head is staying focused and not paying attention to what your body's actually doing as far as
That's I agree with you. That's
weaving.
why I'm going to do the experiment, Tucker, where the kid has to walk to me, so I will watch her
Yep.
and
Yeah.
make sure that she is on track and not just doing this thing where she's got her eyes locked, but she's walking all over the place. Because I can see that happening where you tunnel vision yourself. You're like, the whole point is to tunnel vision to your destination. And so maybe subjectively, then you're not realizing that your feet are not exactly going one foot in front of the other. You're kind of drifting and whatever, and compensating unconsciously for the other people.
Yeah. I think just to bring it back to the scopaesthesia thing, like, again, it's the tunnel vision, the focus, but like, what if it is some field that you're projecting out of your eyes that people, the crowd is parting because they can kind of feel like, oh, I'm in the way of this thing. I got to move out of the way of this invisible field.
This person is absorbing all the photons in this direction, and I can sense the vacuum, and I stay out of it.
Right.
But that's the hard part. Is what we're talking about is the receiver also being a transmitter. And so back to the metaphor of the radio, I can see us being a receiver, and I can allow for the universe having a story, and we tune in for the story during our lifetime. And sometimes, the broadcast is strong, and sometimes it's weak, and we have, you take a mushroom and it gets real crazy strong or whatever, But I don't know if I'm okay with the brain being a transmitter that then makes its own story go, so that you can feel the eyes on the back. I don't know, but I'm in this weird place. I really am. Ontologically neutral, I guess I could say.
Yeah. Well done. Well, this is probably a good place to wrap up. I can't wait to hear how the experiment goes, Bob. So, like, if whenever you do it, I think one way or the other we'll like start next episode with, talking through that. And any experiences we have during the week of if you're in a crowd and you try it, I think that'll be like a nice follow up to start with next time. But yeah, this topic's going to go on forever, you guys. Like, there's so much. I really, just like with contact, I feel like we've hardly scratched the surface. Like, a lot of the things that come up, there's so much more. The tulpomancy thing, like inner homunculus thing. So we'll dive into those, next time for sure. Here's something I thought was interesting, a quote that I found that I love that we're going to end on this, because I don't think it has anything to do with what we've talked about so far. So something to contemplate for the week as well. But anyway, so I'm going to read the quote. But before I do that, let's see. So if you're liking what you're hearing, please leave us a review wherever you're listening to this. And you can contact us at sendingpoets@gmail.com. Thank you guys again. I love these conversations. I'm so glad we're doing this. I can't wait to keep going. Any parting final words before I close with this quote?
No.
You don't owe anything, Tucker, because your analogy on the masturbation and sex thing with creation, chef's kiss, my friend. So good. I'm definitely going to use that.
My parting gift will be, when we go to Universal Studios, I hopefully will have this little tool in my toolkit now where I can park the line and I can get to that. We'll see. We'll see how it works. But they might chase me down and tackle me if I do so. I don't know, maybe I use a superpower, like it's a long, because what ends up happening, you go to the restaurant and it's like a 2-hour wait, and you just had this beautiful day and everybody's hungry. You get to the restaurant, it's like 2 hours and it's already 6:30, and they're like, yes, sir. And you're just like, all right, well, if I had this power, I would manipulate the line. Now,
right this way, sir.
Yeah, exactly. Right this way, sir. Hopefully someday, if you're listening to this podcast, you will gain these superpowers. And if you do, email us at gmail.com and tell us all about it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, thanks, guys. And check this out. So this is by George, or I don't know if it's George or Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Sorry, don't have a background. Look, just saw this quote. The history of the world is none other than the progress of the consciousness of freedom. Chew on that for this week, you guys.